Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar on civic literacy in Pennsylvania and the benefits of civic literacy for a brighter economic future in the state. I'm Richard Idlin, the National Policy Director with Business for America. And we're really excited to have three great presenters this morning to talk about the importance of civic education in the state of Pennsylvania and have a number of different perspectives on the value of civic education. So today we have the support of a number of organizations who are really helpful in promoting this, including the Committee of 70, Fair Districts PA, Generation Citizen, Global Philadelphia, the League of Women Voters, and PA Youth Vote. So we appreciate all those organizations helping spread the word, and they all are also working on civic education. So we support their work as well. And if you're interested in learning more about Business for America's work in Pennsylvania and the types of events that we're involved in and some of our projects, you can go online and subscribe to get our newsletter, which is listed there on the screen for you. And we send out a monthly newsletter that you'll be receiving as you sign up. And then let me introduce our speakers here and tell you a little bit about each of them and the role that they are playing in promoting civic education in Pennsylvania. The first person we'll hear from is Jim Gerlach, and Jim is a former congressman representing Pennsylvania. He was in the House of Representatives for 12 years, 6 terms. And before that, served in the Pennsylvania legislature from 91 to 2002, part of that time in the state Senate, part of that in the House. And Jim currently is the CEO of the Greater Reading Chamber of Commerce Alliance, which is obviously located in Greater Reading, Pennsylvania. We're then going to hear from Ariel Jennings, who's the Chief Partnerships Officer for a national organization called Generation Citizen, which works with high school students across the country in giving them an opportunity to apply what they learn in the classroom as far as U.S. civics, history, and how government works. And finally, we'll hear from Angelique Hinton, and Angelique is the executive director of PA Youth Vote. And PA Youth Vote focuses on encouraging young people to become more active citizens and participate particularly in their civic responsibility by voting. And Angelique worked in the state Senate of Pennsylvania for a number of years as the director of community outreach for a state senator. So why are we having this webinar this morning? And that's really the question. Why should business care about civics? So just by way of quick background, Business for America is a national nonpartisan nonprofit that works with businesses across the country to encourage greater political participation, look for bipartisan, nonpartisan solutions to some of the challenges that our democracy is currently facing. And over the years, we've discovered by talking to a number of companies that they see great value and importance in having a more civically literate public that starts with school-age kids, but goes into the workforce. And many companies, again, that we've spoken with, note that a more civically literate, more civically aware public makes for a better workforce. People tend to be more collaborative, work better on teams, have a number of problem-solving skills that are really important in the workplace. We've also learned that in many cases, a more civically literate public helps to reduce the sense of polarization that many people across the country are experiencing, and also is a good antidote to people being susceptible to mis and disinformation. So from the business perspective, civic literacy and civic education is not only good for the economy and the workforce, but also good for a sense of community and a better understanding of citizenship and what it means to be a citizen, your rights and responsibilities. So one of the challenges that we're facing, not only in Pennsylvania, but across the country, as pointed out in 2022 from a survey that the University of Pennsylvania conducted, is that only about 47% of Americans can name the three branches of government. And you can imagine that the challenges and problems that can create in people's lack of understanding about how government works in the country. In 2018, the Pennsylvania State Legislature sought to address this challenge in part by passing Act 35, which required all schools to administer a locally developed test about U.S. history, government, and civics for students at least between the ages of 7th and 12th grade. So students had to take that assessment test at least once during those years in middle and high school. And today we're going to discuss how effective that test is, what changes might be made, what other ways there are to teach civics. And Pennsylvania, being a very large state, has 501 school districts. And what has become clear is that since 2018, that assessment test is being unevenly administered across the state. In some cases, schools have the resources and are paying attention to administering the test, and in other cases, it doesn't seem to be happening at all. And that is why we think there needs to be more attention paid on a statewide basis to civic education. So with that as our introduction, Jim, let me turn to you first and ask the question, both from your perspective as a former member of Congress and now as the executive director of the Greater Reading Chamber of Commerce, why is civic education, why is a civically literate school-age population, let's start with that, why is that important?
Well, thank you, Richard. I think the way you described it a few moments ago is just right, that an employer, I would think, wants to have workers that not only know how to do their jobs within the confines of the company's facilities or offices, but they want employees that are more broadly engaged in their communities. Folks that are civically aware of what the problems are in their communities and might even go further than that and be volunteers within their communities to work on certain things, everything from being a Boy Scout or Girl Scout leader to helping with Meals on Wheels to helping the volunteers that go down and clean the community park, that you want employees that not only do their jobs very well for your company, but also more broadly can be effective leaders in their communities. Those tend to be people then that not only are doing a good job every single day in your office or in your facility, but are also representing you as a company out there in the community. Because most folks know when they're interacting with other people within their community, they know who they work for, they know what company they're representing. And so it's a wonderful way for the company to be represented within the community overall by the good works that their employers are doing as citizens. So companies have a real important interest in making sure not only that they're performing well for their shareholders or their owners and their customers, but also are employing people that are more well-rounded than just what they do in that office 8 hours a day or in that facility hours a day, that they're also engaged as citizens in their communities and are contributing to the welfare and the well-being of the communities that they're in.
Mm-hmm. And Jim, as you think about the Greater Reading Chamber, are there programs that you have helped develop that encourage companies to partner with schools or to encourage civic literacy?
We, through, as you well know, Richard, we have a coalition, statewide coalition underway now called PA Civics, which is an organization, a coalition, so to speak, of a number of prominent organizations in Pennsylvania to try to promote civics education. And through that work, we're trying to identify ways that we can, in the business community, continue that promotional work within the communities where our companies are. In the last year or so, the U.S. Chamber undertook a civics bee competition in a few targeted states around the country. The Pennsylvania Chamber then in turn worked to get chambers within Pennsylvania to do that same kind of contest to try to highlight the importance of civics within school districts around the state. We attempted that at Greater Reading Chamber Alliance. Unfortunately, when we started our effort, it was a little bit too late in the school year to get a number of our teachers engaged and identify students that would participate, but it's high on our list for next year to start earlier and to get a civics bee competition underway. And we think in the conversations we've had with our business leaders, there's a lot of excitement. A lot of our business leaders want to serve as judges in that competition, want to see our schools do well and hopefully move on to the state competition and do well there. So there's a lot of interest in that. And we think if we can get that established, that'll start a conversation within Berks County on the importance of civics education, not only among the businesses, but also with our educators that are teaching civics and history and government in our schools throughout the year.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Jim, I mentioned at the top that polarization is a real challenge, not only in Pennsylvania, but throughout the country. And do you see civic literacy, civic education as a way to help bring people together by giving them maybe more of a common understanding about how government works?
Yeah, in my prior work at a group called BIPAC, Business Industry Political Action Committee in Washington, D.C., which is a nonpartisan organization that works with employers to get them to communicate and work with their employees on public policy and on election information. Employees really have a great thirst for information regarding the policies that affect the success of their companies and their industries, as well as, in the next election, who's running and what's their position on issues important to their jobs as employees for those companies. However, with that said, the employers that do it right understand that it will not work if a company tries to communicate information to employees in a way that the employees take it as you're trying to tell us how to think, you're trying to tell us how to think about an issue or how to even vote in an election. But if it's information that's given objectively, and it's information that's right down the middle as in terms of what the issue is and what the impact is on the company, employees really care about that, and then we'll use that when they're out in the community in advocating for policy or deciding who to vote for in an election. So that employer-employee engagement is really important. It has to be done the right way, but if it is done the right way, it's a very effective way to get more employees informed about what's going on in public policy arena as well as what's going on in the electoral arena.
Right. Yeah, and let me, Jim, your comment reminds me to point out that to the audience that Business for America focuses on two different ways of approaching civic education. One, as you just mentioned, is working with companies and their employees, and we've done quite a bit of that in get out the vote initiatives with companies. Again, not telling anyone who to vote for, but rather explaining how the process of voting works. Then the other aspect of our work is in the public and charter school system, making sure that kids have access to good civic education. Let me ask Jim, when we were talking last week about Act 35, you noted that it was a good start, but has been unevenly applied across the state. And in some cases, schools have lots of resources and teachers that are familiar with how to teach civics and history and government. In other cases, that may not be the situation. So going forward, how does Pennsylvania create a more robust statewide civic education initiative for students again?
Yeah, I think just like in any other program, there's some schools that teach certain sciences better than other schools, and there's some schools that teach mathematics better than some other schools. So with the diversity of school districts and educational settings that we have in Pennsylvania, there are going to be some that do it better than others in just about every area of educational teaching. And so I think, particularly through the PA Civics Coalition, we need to, number one, better understand what is the status of teaching civics in Pennsylvania. We now have the Act 35 requirement, but we know from just the initial few years of its implementation that schools are using different assessment tools. Some are really good. Some might be just very basic stuff that really aren't getting to the nub of really understanding how advanced those students who are being assessed understand civics and understand history and government in Pennsylvania. So we need to get a better handle on what the quality of the assessments that are being used, number one. Number two, the quality of continuing teacher development in this area of education, making sure, regardless of whether you're a social studies teacher in the most rural district in Pennsylvania or the most urbanized district in Pennsylvania, you have teacher development programming available to you that's giving you opportunities to have the tools to teach what you need to teach in your school in the very best way and get the very best outcomes. And we need to then make sure there's the resources statewide for those assessments to be formulated and utilized and the teacher development to be undertaken. And if we can work on that, then we'll have a more unified and uniform process of teaching civics in Pennsylvania. And then let's assess where we are at that point compared to where we are today. And hopefully we'd see much greater improvement in the civics learning of our students year after year. So that's what we're going to try to strive for through our PA Civics Coalition. And with a new governor and a new Secretary of Education, hopefully we can gain their support in that effort and work collectively together towards that goal.
Great, great. Jim, we have a question from Mike Liverwright that says, how do you mediate between the liberal and conservative viewpoints of the true, in quotes, American history and civic literacy? So, you know, obviously there are lots of different interpretations about what should be taught. Civic education, unfortunately, has become part of the broader culture war. And, you know, it's become quite challenging in different states, particularly Florida, to determine, you know, what should get taught in as part of the civic education curriculum. So how do you think about that?
Well, to me, civics education is not about what are the policy issues and what position do you take on the policy issues, and is that the right position if you're more to the left or more to the right. Civics education is a tiered process, it seems to me, where number one, you're learning about what our foundational underpinnings are as a country, what your rights are as a citizen, which are expressed through the Constitution, and then of course a lot of court cases since then. And then how do you take your freedoms that you have as a citizen and then start thinking about your responsibilities in exchange for those rights that you have as a citizen, in terms of engaging in your community, identifying problems, identifying issues that need to be worked on, and then figuring out who do I have to work with in my community or in my state or eventually in the nation to really have a positive impact on the outcome of those problems. And that's important understanding and important learning, regardless of whether, again, you're more to the left or more to the right on any particular issue. We're going to continue and always have had in our nation disagreement on policy issues. But the question is, how do we look beyond those differences and then work together as citizens to try to come up with some common solutions and some common advancement in the quality of life in our communities and in our nation. That's what civic learning is about, to then take that understanding of what a citizen is, give you skills to then interact with other people in your community, to then develop positive outcomes to move your community forward. So that is how I look at civics education, regardless of whether you look at a particular issue from the right or from the left.
Right. Thank you. And I think your point about it really being mostly focused on process and citizenship, the rights and responsibilities, and not policy or politics, I think that's a key distinction.
Yeah.
Good. Ariel, you work directly on a number of the issues that Jim just described about helping young people understand the idea of citizenship and their rights and responsibilities. And Generation Citizen has pioneered a program like a science fair, but it's a civics fair or a civics day. in which you seek to ensure that students have an opportunity to apply these fundamental foundational principles that Jim was just describing about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, et cetera. And so could you tell us about a little bit about Generation Citizen and what Civics Day involves as you've been running it? And I know you just did a program in Philadelphia a few months ago.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Certainly, at Generation Citizen, we work across the country, serving over 30,000 students a year right now, including in Philadelphia, and hoping to grow across Pennsylvania in the coming years. In a program that, yes, culminates in Civics Day, which is an incredible showcase of our students' work in the communities, but really is a process of learning to reach this ideal of civic learning that Jim was describing, where a young person not only possesses the foundational civic knowledge of, our U.S. history, our founding documents, an understanding of local, state, and federal government processes, the civic infrastructure in their local community, but also builds civic skills to then be able to participate in our democracy, and what we call civic efficacy and belonging. So it's great, to be equipped with knowledge and have these skills for participation. But if you don't feel as a young person and then into adulthood, a purpose, a reason to participate, a connection to your community in any way, then you're likely to not vote and to not participate. So really across civic knowledge, skills, and efficacy, we create experiences partnering with incredible educators in our schools to have a learning experience called Action Civics. And essentially, it is a process where young people examine their communities. They pick issues that are relevant to them, that they care about, from teen mental health to food insecurity. And they collectively as a class work over a semester to create a civics project that's real in their community. We really think of an analogy to science labs where, you would never just teach science in your K through 12 education. You would have young people engage in lab experiences where they're doing it. And we really feel that the community is a civics lab for young people to try out early in their life, working with elected officials, whether they're trying to pass a piece of legislation about mental health at the state level, or they're trying to advocate potentially for more money in a school budget for guidance counselors. There's really incredible work that young people can do in their communities and then, of course, learn from. And so that process is called Action Civics.
Mm-hmm. And when you reflect on Jim's comment about the value that businesses and employers derive from young people who have civics as part of their education, do you have some anecdotal stories or some direct evidence of the benefits of students going through your programs and then ending up in the workplace because of skills they've acquired?
Yes, well, we as an organization, we assess our student development across these skills, and we are seeing really large gains in critical thinking, in being able to have civil discourse across difference, public presentation skills, teamwork, these skills that are incredibly valuable for the workforce, as well as participating in your community and contributing to it through the responsibilities you have for a community. So we see a lot of crossover in success in college and career, and have lots, our alumni are going on to do incredible things. Some work, are inspired to work directly in public service, but many go into other industries and then are able to contribute to their companies in really meaningful ways, engage deeply with corporate responsibility initiatives within those companies, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. And Ariel, one of the challenges in Pennsylvania, and I'm sure elsewhere in the country, is bringing teachers up to speed and preparing them to adequately teach civics. So how does Generation Citizen work with teachers in junior and high schools?
Yeah, so this is an incredibly important point that's being made about investing in our teachers. For decades, civic education has been divested in our public education system. We spend 5 cents per student on civics and $54 per student on STEM. So we have, a real issue where civics and in some instances social studies has disappeared from some schools, and certainly is not being invested into the need that it is. Further, we see pretty deep inequities across schools when we look at if they're under-resourced, especially in rural communities and in cities. And so we need to think really critically about how we invest and how we have as states, which is another thing that Generation Citizen does. We work with coalitions to really craft policies that create funding streams and state policies that incentivize support for our teachers to really bring back civics and bring it back in this real world deep way. Teachers are often not given the training in their preparatory years around civics and certainly around project-based real-world action civics. And they're sometimes not from the communities of which they teach. So if they're going to be engaging their students in real-world civics and sending them out into the communities to do these projects, there's a lot of learning through professional development and instructional coaching that's needed. We are one of many organizations that support teachers in that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I know that action-based civics learning has become controversial in some parts of the country. I believe the Texas legislature forbid by law students to contact their state legislators to inquire about XYZ based on something they might have learned in school. So since Generation Citizen is a active supporter of civics-based and action-based learning, what is, from your perspective, the controversy about? Why are some folks anxious about action-based learning where students can go apply what they've just been taught in the classroom?
Yeah, it's a great question. At Generation Citizen, we believe action civics is a nonpartisan teaching and learning method. I think where the anxiety comes up is that this is a student-led centered process where young people pick issues that are affecting their lives. And then they take action on those issues. They have to form a consensus on an issue as a class and would never move forward on an issue that was controversial to them as a class. Mm-hmm. When they take action, that action is hyper local. Our students are operating at the state or city or school district level, and often highly nonpartisan, getting more money in the budget for guidance counselors, for example, or more trash cans in a local park. So I think where the fear it exists is around young people taking action on issues that are controversial. But if we continue to center them and their voice and ensure that the process is led by them, then the work that they're doing is, agreed upon by everyone and often highly nonpartisan in nature and local. And we have to also weigh the risk of not engaging young people in real world civics. And that risk is that we have an electorate that has some very wonderful basic civic knowledge, but does not have any skills or sense of efficacy to participate in our democracy. So we're really thinking about that critically, and we're preparing our teachers on how to lead conversations in the classroom that are bringing together different perspectives and ensuring students are moving forward on the issues in respectable ways through civility.
Ariel, I know with the Civics Day program that we helped organize in Philadelphia a few months ago, our responsibility was to help bring businesses into the process to be mentors and judges. And obviously, from Business for America's perspective, we feel that there's great value in businesses investing in civic education, which we talked about a bit with Jim. But how does Generation Citizen look at the role of business in supporting civic education in the school system primarily? What role can business people be thinking about they can play?
It's a great question. So there's sort of a human volunteerism component to that, and then a resource component to that. In terms of human volunteerism, we are hoping that one day civics days, these incredible showcases for students' civics work, will be as common as science fairs. And they need community and business leaders at them to listen to the students, to give advice, to learn from the students, first and foremost, about what they're working on in their communities, and to help them progress their projects, and to build that sense of belonging and efficacy in their community by seeing a business leader there, listening to them as they present their project to them. So certainly as civics days grow, hopefully one day to be as common as science fairs, the business community is coming out and really showing themselves as volunteers in those spaces. And then another area is from a capital perspective. As I mentioned, civics education needs to be financially invested in, and that involves public and private initiatives and partnerships. So we work in a lot of states where we work with governors and legislators to create funds, like they're called civics trust funds in many cases, for civics education. And then we have the private sector, the business sector, and our philanthropic sector also stepping up to contribute to support funding for civics education and to really revitalize it. If we could have deep investment over the next 10 years, an infusion of capital into our public school systems across the country, that's going to make a large difference.
That's great. It reminds me, Ariel, of an effort we have underway in Indiana that we hope could maybe be replicated in Pennsylvania, where we've created the Business Alliance for Civics in Indiana, bringing companies in like Cummins and Salesforce and Eli Lilly, who want to support not only what happens in the schools, but also, to Jim's point, provide their employees with civic education. So that's something we're actively considering in Pennsylvania. Happy to talk to anyone about that further. So Ariel, thanks. Let me turn to Angelique. And Angelique, you've been thinking, I know, a lot about this idea of making sure young people have agency and a voice and feel compelled and inspired to, in fact, participate. And, listening to Jim and Ariel, I wonder if you could tell us why PA Youth Vote exists and how it relates to this larger idea of being an engaged citizen.
So PA Youth Vote exists essentially out of a need that was expressed to me back in 2020. But I think it's important to kind of take you through the journey of how we got there and how I became the person leading this organization. I grew up in a very underserved community. I grew up in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, very wealthy, second wealthiest county in the state. But I grew up in a predominantly Black, brown community, very disinvested in underfunded school district, disproportionate representation. So a lot of in the criminal justice system, so a lot of disenfranchisement, marginalization. And so living in a community like that, many people kind of stop looking at government as a solution for their problems because they just have not seen government be responsive to the needs of their communities. I then had an opportunity to work in a very ultra high net worth client facing group where we service very wealthy people. And I saw some of the policies that were put in place. We created trusts, right, which allowed, wealthier people to avoid paying taxes, things of that nature. Anyway, long story short, I came to understand that policy has a lot to do with, just kind of where you end up in life, right? And lack of participation really is directly tied to responsiveness and oftentimes to the needs of a community. And so in 2020, I started doing some work. I worked in government for a little bit, like you said, and then I got the opportunity to work in a school district in Philadelphia. And the teachers, I got to talk to about 6 teachers before the world shut down with COVID. And they all said to me the same thing: I don't need help registering my students, right? I need help getting them to understand why they should be voting, right? Why voting is important, how voting really plays a role in, again, their day-to-day lived experience, right? And so from that, it was just like a light went off. And so what we do is we kind of help provide the why. So we're very hyper local, meaning like every election, we really focus on what's on the ballot, what seats are on the ballot, and how they impact, issues that young people care about, right? And so we really try to make sure, one, they have information, very nonpartisan, but again, very issues based, because not surprisingly to me, but surprisingly to many who don't live in these communities, many people in communities like the one I come from don't even realize that the district attorney is elected, right? Or they are frustrated with the federal government for something that is actually the responsibility of their local government, or they're upset at the school board because of something that's really the state legislature's responsibility, like school funding. So really, it's just kind of helping them understand, right, who is responsible to address the issues that they're really concerned with, and then really kind of, again, giving them nonpartisan information and resources so they can understand, who's on the ballot, really identify which one most aligns with their values, right? And then we also really take a lot of time in helping young people understand that, democracy is participatory, right? And so it's not enough to just vote, but to really continue to stay engaged, and then also hold leaders accountable to really being responsive to the needs of all of their constituencies. And so we put a lot of work into helping them understand, like we did recently, a lesson where young people learned how to write op-eds, really helping them understand that there are other things that we need to do as citizens, right, to help our elected leaders understand, what our issues are, what our concerns are, and to hold them accountable to addressing them.
Mhm. That's great. That's great, Angelique. And the work of PA Youth Vote, is it centered in a number of communities in the Philly area, or is it statewide at this point?
So it's statewide, but we, because of COVID, right, have been mostly successful in Philadelphia. We have a great partnership with the school district there, right, where we help, again, like Generation Citizen, we provide curriculum for teachers, but we also provide that added level of support for those teachers that, again, we are serving low income communities, right? Predominantly Black and Brown communities, so those most underserved communities. And so in some cases, I don't know if you're aware, but Pennsylvania has an inequitable school funding issue and was deemed unconstitutional in its funding of public education last year. And so that really makes a difference in what teachers have the capacity to do in any school district. And even within Philadelphia school district, there's magnet schools, right? And then there's neighborhood schools, and the experience day to day is completely different in what teachers have capacity to bring as far as additional curriculum, can be challenging. And so in those schools, we will go in and we will provide, training. We work with the commissioners in Philadelphia, and we do a civic engagement tour where we just, each election cycle, just kind of talk about what's on the ballot, right? How it impacts them, but really trying to figure out ways to partner with school districts, teachers, and even some grassroots organizations to make sure that, we are connecting civics and civic participation, as solutions to a lot of the issues that these communities continue to face when it comes to like inequity and just, again, that lack of responsiveness.
Right. And what results are you seeing from the work you've been doing over the past few years? Are, for instance, more young people getting registered to vote? Are young people running for office? What are the outcomes you're seeing?
So we tell them they need to do all of the above, right? And so we try to help them. One thing that I think we've seen is a incredible increase in confidence in young people understanding their voice can really contribute to change in a number of ways. And so voting is one way, but then also, you know, in just advocacy work, right, for themselves. And it can be in something political, but it can just be something in the classroom that they have a concern about, really helping them feel confident to understand that constructively through your voice, you can create change and hold people accountable, right, to actually being more responsive to things you'd like to see happen. So we've had students, I remember one student in particular who, when he first came, he was like super shy and extremely introverted. And so over the years, he's been with us since 2020 and is now actually doing a lot of this work, leading our work in college, that he's in Penn State. And then ultimately we're going to be doing some work out in the western part of the state. He's going to be helping to lead that. But it was through, you know, really just helping him get comfortable, you know, being uncomfortable and using his voice and speaking at press conferences and speaking at school board meetings. That now, last year we did an event in partnership with the mayor's office, and he did a press conference standing next to the mayor of Philadelphia and was extremely confident and owned the room. And so we're seeing like an increased level of again, leadership and confidence, but then also the understanding of how, you know, civic participation can really change the dynamics that they've been experiencing. And so they want to stay, they're very action oriented and want to stay engaged, and then also go out and try to bring in people in their community and their peers to understanding why all of this really matters.
That's great. That's an inspiring story. Sounds like you know, that person will be running for governor one day. Good. Let me pause here and bring Azaz Gill in. And Azaz is BFA's Pennsylvania State Director, working on civic education initiatives and also a number of our nonpartisan advocacy campaigns. So Azaz, the work that we did, that you led on Civics Day, where you involved a number of businesses, maybe just relay the value that those companies derived, you know, from being part of the Civics Day. You know, what were the reasons why companies were interested in participating?
Well, so first, let me take a step back and talk about like our efforts on Civics Day. So Civics Day in Philadelphia was basically like a science fair, but instead of civics, we were instead of science, we were talking about civics. There were a number of high school students from across Philadelphia that presented projects on some very real life issues. For instance, one of the presentations was on public safety on public transportation, which is a particularly timely topic in Philadelphia. Now, those students got to receive mentorship from community advisors who were business leaders and other diverse professions as well. So the students definitely benefited from that, but our business, the community leaders also benefited from that experience, because they got to see some of the real life issues that young people care about. And they also got to see some solutions offered to the problems that Philadelphia is facing. I mean, one of our feedbacks from Civics Day was our advisor saying, "Oh man, we wish the event was longer so we could have more interaction with the students."
So what are you planning for the rest of this year, and as you think about 2024, as far as civic education and, again, specifically the role of the business community in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So one of the things that just happened we're particularly proud of is that Business for America has become a member of PA Civics, which Congressman Gerlach talked about earlier. And we look forward to, preparing. Their mission is to prepare students for active citizenship in their communities. And we look forward to working with some of the great organizations which are part of PA Civics. Now, you brought up earlier Act 35. Now, Act 35 requires local school bodies, of which there are about 501 in Pennsylvania, to administer a test on civics. Now, this is the most significant piece of legislation around civics that Pennsylvania has had. So, and the bill, Act 35, was passed around 2018, if I'm correct. Congressman Gerlach brought up earlier that there's an uneven application of its implementation. Now, what this does is it sort of creates this void, right? You don't have even application of civics, and then there's multiple ad hoc efforts in Pennsylvania from different organizations on civics. What Business for America can bring to that, we recognize that, and this is where we believe we can fill a void by bringing businesses in to create an alliance of which focuses on civics, and that'll provide a large tent for all these organizations which are involved in civics to be under. I certainly look forward to working with businesses, trade associations, and chambers of commerce to make that possible.
Great, great. Azaz, also, what's, as you've been talking to companies in Pennsylvania, what are you essentially hearing their concern is about civic literacy? Does it relate to this issue of conflict in the workplace? People are arguing about things where they may not really have the facts. Are employees disengaged? Are they, just angry about the state of politics in America, in part, again, because they're not educated? What is your sense of how these issues about civic literacy are affecting businesses?
Well, I think there's a number of things, right? One of the things that companies care about is workforce development. And if you don't have an engaged citizenry at a younger age who are coming into the workforce, they don't feel like they're part of they feel less likely to be part of the community. And as businesses, they want community engaged employees. So that's one of the ways that business has sort of concerns that business has responded with, is that it creates a lack of workforce development in Pennsylvania.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Jim, let me go back to you for a moment. There've been, again, a number of questions about what gets taught and how to balance the knowledge piece with the application piece. So, from your perspective, having served in Congress, having been a state legislator, and now working for business organization, what is, from your sense, an appropriate balance here between giving students, the basic understanding of the Constitution, the founding of the Republic, and then making sure they can go out and apply this in their life in some fashion?
Well, again, if you look at it as a three-step process, starting with knowledge of what our system of governance is in the United States, our structure of government, our federalist system, federal, state, local governments, and then you get into skills development. All right, how do you, based on that structure, then in addition to just the levels of government, what are your rights as a citizen, and what are the rights within the First Amendment, for example, speech and religion and assembly? How do those correspond to today's world and your experience as an individual? And then based on that knowledge, and then getting into skills, right? How do you take that knowledge and that information to then start applying it to the problems you have within your community? And then what is the right ways to dispose of those or resolve those issues, the disposition part of it? I think effective civics education has to take a student through all three stages to produce an individual that is then ready to really take on a leadership role in his or her community where they are. And then there's ancillary organizations like businesses and organizations represented here by Angelique and Ariel, and of course many others, from the Pennsylvania Bar Association to the National Constitution Center to Business for America, that can wrap around all of that as somebody comes out of the schools that he or she are in and begin working in the communities on problems. So it's a progression of skill development and understanding that then produces somebody that wants to get involved and try to address problems in the communities, states, and of course the nation. So I think that's what we have to get to, a more uniform, consistent development of those skills at those three stages to then produce the citizens we want, at least in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So we're certainly not there yet. Act 35 is a great starting point, but it may need to be amended a little bit further and revised further based on experiences that people and teachers and others have with it. But that's okay. That's all part of the legislative process. That's all part of our development as a democracy. So bottom line is we need to work together collectively to help those skills be developed and those dispositions be developed. And then that creates the outcomes we're all seeking.
Thank you. Azaz, just on that point, what is the prognosis for amending, updating Act 35 in the state legislature this session?
The prognosis is not good. We currently have a divided legislature in Pennsylvania. It's 102 Democrats to 101 in Republicans in the House and the Senate. And you alluded to earlier the tension between some of the different schools of thought on civics. So to get the legislature to agree on it, on anything in Harrisburg is, as their budget efforts show right now, is a difficult task.
Right. So, on that point, and I think we're seeing this in Indiana and a number of other states across the country where the business community weighs in, makes an economic argument about investing in civic education, can really be a determinant factor in encouraging state legislatures to take this issue more seriously. So we have just a few more minutes, but Ariel, I quickly wanted to go back to you for a moment. And what is your plan for extending Civics Day beyond Philadelphia into other communities in Pennsylvania, ideally?
Yeah, we're excited to grow across Pennsylvania. We're hiring some staff that will be in the Philadelphia area to help with that growth. Starting with Philadelphia, though, we have worked with a handful of high schools, and we hope to work with all of the high schools over the next 3 to 5 years. So we'll be doubling that number next year. And so invite folks in that area to come to that Civics Day. But we would love to partner with school districts and communities and community leaders that are interested in bringing civics days and project-based real-world civics to their communities and students. And we have, a particular emphasis as an organization on working with communities that have fewer resources and that are, usually don't have as strong of access to civic education and that civic infrastructure. So we want to eventually work to support students in Pittsburgh and of course want to listen to community need if programs like this, sometimes they already exist and it's wonderful. So really go where the need is.
Great, thank you. And Angelique, similar question, but targeting how does PA Youth Vote wish to work with or extend its work with businesses in educating the next generation of civic leaders? What's the role for business?
So for me, I think collaboration is going to save this nation. So collaborating with organizations like PA Youth Vote, the business, again, with resources, right? Again, we're working in the most underserved and under-resourced school districts. So funding, for instance, us offering after-school programming that can introduce this material when schools don't have the capacity to do it is great. I think also using your influence as business leaders. A lot of times you often have influence on legislatures, right? To make sure that they are thinking about creating, funding, but also legislation that will be promoting more young people having easier access to voting, right? A lot of times we, struggle with some of the policies here. We have to do registration twice a year because of the way the system is set up here, but really just kind of really pushing leaders, right? Leaders, I tell our students all the times, right? Our leaders are going to be responsive to the people. And so if the people are asking, right, collaboratively as a community coming together, asking for these things, then I do think our leaders will be responsive. So that's, I think, the two things that could be most helpful for us.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks everybody for a robust conversation. I really appreciate Ariel, Jim, Angelique, and Azaz's time this morning. And if any of you listening wish to learn more, you can contact Azaz at Azaz, AIZA at bfa.us. And we'll be happy to work with your organization or company. And as Jim said, to really encourage a greater understanding of one's rights and responsibilities as a citizen of the United States, it's really a crucial task that we need all hands on deck for. So again, thanks everyone. Have a great afternoon. We appreciate your time today. Thank you.